I have screwed up so many times, and apparently I'm an idiot. Hey, what's going on? My name is Al. Recently, I got an Elegoo Mars 2 Pro, which is a 3D printer, and I'm just going to be walking you through, talking about all of the mistakes that I've created, and hopefully, if you're into 3D printing, you don't make the same mistakes that I did. So to start off, I really enjoy Uncle Jesse's channel. When I started this 3D printing journey, I just oh, here's some settings that he flashed on screen, and I just paused the video, copied them down, and ran with it. It turns out those were vroom settings, and if you have no idea what that is, it's basically just to speed up your printer, and it ain't for noobs like me. So right off the bat, obviously, things did not work well for me. So the next mistake that I did was, I created a sculpt in Zbrush, brought it into the slicing software. It's called Lychee. I just clicked auto supports and just sent it to the printer. What a terrible idea. It failed, and auto supports suck. As I'm failing my first 3D print failure, right? I've got things attached to the build plate, and then I have things attached to the FEP, which is the plastic, the bottom of your vat. So I have this vat full of resin, and I have to dump this back into the container, and they come with these little paper funnels. I'm pouring this vat, and then I'm not really paying attention to it. There are these holes on the side of this funnel. I guess I thought it was this resin had a lower viscosity, that it would just flow right through and I wouldn't have a problem, but nope, it just kind of filled up the funnel, and I had most of the vat just all over my floor. This is all first day. After that, I empty out the vat, and I have, that partially cured print on the FEP, which is that plastic piece at the bottom. So I'm using the plastic spatula and just scraping and poking. I don't know what the heck I'm doing. And well, it turns out I poked a little bitty hole into my FEP. I didn't know there was a hole in it then. Put the vat back on the printer, fill that bad boy back up with resin, start my next print. Well, guess what? Yep, I had resin leaking underneath, and then it cured on the screen, and I'm just oh my gosh. I thought I would just have to throw the printer away. Thankfully, I was able to gently, scrape this off, and we were good to go. But just all of this happened day one, before I had any successful prints whatsoever. So in my mind, I'm what in the world did I get myself into? Before we move on to my even more extreme mistakes, if you're interested in the sculpts that I do, check out my Patreon. Every month I have models, and now I'm starting to pre-support models. I'm still learning, but lots of great models coming in March, so be sure to check it out. It'll be linked down below. The next up, right, I've made so many mistakes, and I have nothing to show for it except a giant mess. I fixed the FEP, the FEP sheet, whatever. It took me an hour, because I was putting the plastic on the vat and then tapping it, trying to get the right frequency. Apparently nobody does that, but I did. Okay, anyways, I'm good to go. Fill her back up. I'm you know what? Screw it. Let's just print the test rook. Probably should have done that to begin with. Elegoo flash drive, they give you this rook right here, like that, like a cool little model. So I just stuck it in there and went. Let me tell you, that was another mistake, because whatever settings that Elegoo had for this model, it just cemented to my build plate. Well, obviously I'm new. This is day one with the printer. I'm oh, this is so cool, something printed. And then I get my metal scraper, putty knife, and I'm chiseling away at this thing, trying to pry it off. It is fused to this build plate. And then I actually tried a different approach, which would be, just grabbing it and trying to yank it off, because it wasn't working any other way, and I ended up breaking it off. But thankfully, I had this one print printed very well, and it was so awesome just to hold my first 3D print. It wasn't mine, it's not something I created, but still pretty darn cool. This is still day one. I wanted to print off one of my kids' sculpts. He did a cool sculpt a while back, and I was going to print it off. It'd be so cool. But first, I modeled a little base that it was going to go on, and since I hadn't really done any successful prints, right, of my own, I accidentally printed it just stupid small. Now granted, this was supposed to be a 25 millimeter diameter base, and this is what I got. Look at that little thing. This is 5 millimeters in diameter. I don't know what the heck I was doing, clearly, at all. But this came out of the print. I just have to laugh at myself. It's ridiculous. Then I tried it again, and you know what? I was gosh, I've already wasted so much time. I did auto supports once again, and guess what? It failed. Yep, sure enough, auto supports, they failed. And I'm just ripping my hair out at this point. I go online, do some research next few days, and I am just trying to absorb as much as I can, how to use Lychee, what in the world to do. And I found, oh, okay, maybe I need to hollow out my model. I took one of my old sculpts, supported it myself. I was super proud, made it hollow. Things are great. Sent to print. And then it was done. I was oh my gosh, it worked. it printed, but there was a problem. So remember when I told you I made this model hollow? Well, I didn't put any drain holes in it, and I didn't think it would be a problem. I didn't know, right? I just didn't know. Imagine a model being hollow and I could shake it and I could hear liquid in there. I'm like, oh, okay, I don't think that's good, but whatever. There's no holes in it, right? I didn't put any there. It's gonna stay in there. Well, I was surely wrong. So that thing sat for a few weeks and then it like basically exploded. It essentially looked like this. Here we go. It was hollow on the inside, filled with resin in there because I didn't add drain holes. And then where it was sitting, there was just like resin everywhere. After that, I did my own supports. I added drain holes. Things were good. I had successfully printed things like this little zombie guy that I've shown, but he's got a drain hole at the bottom. Worked out well. I have two more severe mistakes. The first one was where I was printing was in my basement. I shut all the doors. There's no windows. For one, it was pretty cool down there. I think I only got the temperature stabilized around 64 degrees, which is pretty chilly for resin printing. But worse than that, there's no windows. I had no way of venting any of this out. My wife has a superpower, and her superpower is smelling. Like she has a much greater sniffer than I do. And this gray, it stinks to her, but it's not like terrible. You know, after I printed with gray successfully, it was cool and all that. I found that Elegoo has this awesome color, mint green. Like, it's so sweet. I love it so much, and I wanted to try it, obviously. So I printed just a handful of things. I started this thing, and she's like, what are you doing? What do you mean what I'm doing? I'm just sitting here watching TV. No. Like, what's that smell? Oh, I'm doing a print. You could smell that? And it just like permeated the whole house. For a couple days, I had to turn on my attic fan, just like get this smell. And she's like, I can't handle it. I can't handle it. She would walk around plugging her nose. She just could not handle it. Needless to say, I never printed with this resin again. I gassed my wife out of my house. The very last mistake that I made, which is so stupid, is terrible. So I do have gloves. For whatever reason, I knocked it off the build plate. I chose not to pick up the gloves. This was one of my very first prints that I did, and I picked it up. I knew I wasn't supposed to get resin on my hands, but I'm like, there's not much there. So I put it under the UV light, and I'm actually holding it with my hand. So I'm like curing it, you know, moving it around like this, trying to get all angles. Did you know that resin, when it's cured, it like has a reaction and it heats up, and I start feeling my fingers like get hot, and I'm like, what's up with that? That's weird. That's a weird sensation. And I had cured the resin to my fingers. My hand was under the UV light, and apparently I'm an idiot. So the current situation, I have since, this like, you know, a month ago, I have moved my whole 3D printing station out in the garage where there's lots of airflow when that door is open, but I have a temperature control system and a small little space heater inside of a grow box, so I can control the temperature pretty much, you know, with a good deal of accuracy. It's a lot more than my basement, but the smell is out of the house. So happy wife, happy life. That's great. You know, after I made most of these mistakes, I dialed in my settings using TableFlip Foundry's cones of calibration. If you haven't seen that, just a little calibration tool, super handy. I like it a lot, but I will link that down in the description. I then learned how to add like my supports relatively well. Like, I'm still learning every single day, but I get much more successful prints, and I'm just printing like crazy. I don't have a whole lot to show for it because I give most of my sculpts away, just what I do. But you've already seen this little zombie guy. I'm just a little desk friend, but I was super stoked, sculpted this and then printed it. A couple more things that I learned is like I always use a raft. In my, you know, the slicing software, that definitely helped, you know, from prying things off the build plate, helps with removal. And then always wear gloves, like, you know, 100%. Anytime I'm touching uncured resin, it doesn't matter, like, I got gloves on. I use an actual funnel to transfer resin from the vat to the jug. And last but not least, I treat my FEP with tender loving care that it deserves. And since that time, like, man, it has been a blast. But I tell you what, the first 2 or 3 days, it was like a nightmare. I had buyer's remorse, but I pushed through, you know what? And there is something super cool about designing something. Either you model it, you sculpt it, and then print it off. This will never get old.